Well, it is a pleasure to be here with you all today and have the opportunity to talk about the supply chain from my perspective in customer success. At Veriforce, and I'll get into what Veriforce is and who we are and what we do in a little bit, but my role is to work directly with our clients. And we actually have three different types of customers. We have our hiring clients like a GE, a Coca-Cola. We have contractors, vendors, and suppliers who are responsible for moving product through the supply chain on behalf of those customers or those clients. And we also have a lot of instructors who are responsible for the learning and development, especially as we see a lot of changes with regulatory compliance, compliance that are mandated by companies like the GEs and Coca-Colas that make sure that what they're doing is following through safety practices. So my job is working with all of those different types of customers. And what I wanted to share with you all today was a little bit about the supply chain risk management sector as it pertains to the customer's perspective. So how do we create those customer journeys, knowing that there's a lot of sausage making that goes in on the inside that our customers don't see? How do we do that in a way that creates that seamlessness for customers? Now, I actually came to Veriforce about a year and a half ago, and prior to that, I came from higher education technology, and some of you may be wondering, well, what in the world does higher education technology have to do with what we're talking about today in the supply chain? I spent a lot of time as an enterprise architect, and that responsibility included ensuring alignment between overall strategic goals, the functions and processes and roles that people have in helping to achieve those goals, and the technology to ensure that alignment. And then I moved into customer success and spent a lot of time working with a wide variety of customers. And so that then led me to Veriforce, where I've had the opportunity to really hone my experience in customer success for Veriforce. So I want to make this session a little bit interactive, and so we'll have two different group discussions, and this will be groups just, you can form your groups with your table. But we're going to talk a little bit about some of the key trends. I'm going to start with that because a lot has happened even over the last year as it pertains to the supply chain. Then we get into that people, process, technology. So when I talk about journey mapping, it's several layers or steps to get there. And a lot of times I see where in the past companies have failed in creating a journey map because they don't really think about the overall impacts of the touch points of the steps. And you kind of have to think about journey mapping in a similar way as you would the supply chain industry, or going through the supply chain, I should say. So when we think about this, I look at the roles that people play because those roles are very critical to their specific functions and outcomes. What are their needs? So for example, someone in procurement is going to have a very different outcome or business need, as someone in EHS, someone on the environment side of the house and safety side. So we also need to understand the applications and core functions and processes of those roles that they play in the supply chain. And then how does that work at the company level, at the work site level, at the contractor or subcontractor level, because each of those have very specific needs that ultimately lead up to the company or the actual client themselves. So then we'll talk about data and analytics and how leading indicators and lagging indicators work overall. And then we'll put it all together, and hopefully we'll have enough time for our second group breakout session. So a little bit about Veriforce. Our focus is on reducing supply chain risk. And our mission is to help ensure that we're helping to bring workers home safe from high hazard jobs. So our goal is to work with clients, partnering with them to create a more safer, sustainable world. And it's really amazing. I was thinking about this, when I spent all that time in higher education, my role, it was helping the mission of starting lives, like starting people into the workforce. And now, kind of on the other side, it's about saving lives, making sure that there's not another serious injury or fatality. And that's one of the metrics that we measure. I mean, how many of you have heard about like SIFs and EMR, TRIR, a little bit about all of that? So All of those are things that happen in the background to understand, help us understand, and help businesses make better data-informed decisions about potential risks in the supply chain. Are you working with a contractor or a vendor or a worker who may not be trained or qualified to do that particular job? And we see a lot of incidents that happen in the oil and gas industry, in various other industries of renewable energy, non-renewable energy, even in the hotel business. You know, we're just talking about that. There are lots of different risks that potentially are out there, and because of some of the trends that have happened as a result of our post-COVID world, we're seeing those trends really manifest and have a deep impact in the supply chain. So our job is to make sure that we are doing this, and we work with a number of different hiring clients and contractors around the world. So we have over 80,000 contractors. We support 120 languages. We have over 5 million individual workers operating in 134 different countries. So we're pretty global, and we're continuing to grow and evolve. And that has really helped shape the way we're looking at the recent trends that have just come out in terms of, you know, how that's impacting our contractors and the people that we work with on a day-to-day basis. So we heard about, we've seen, this has been a big topic, AI, generative AI. How many of you are using that today? Not a lot, but you're familiar with it. So this is still new, but it's the big buzzword of the year. And so we've seen a lot of discussions around leveraging artificial intelligence and generative AI. So how does that work in the supply chain? Well, when we think about, and this will be another topic I come up with later on, but when we think about one of the trends that's happened, where in the post-COVID world, we had a lot of workers retiring, and we have not a lot of new workers coming in to replace those jobs. So the influx of workers that are coming in are having a problem with actually learning on-site, onboarding, getting an understanding of their role and responsibility, and the training that's needed to support their ability to complete the job. So how do we leverage AI to help onboard companies or onboard their workers or train in learning and development? Well, that's one of the ways in which we can leverage AI for that. Also, the ability to provide feedback loops to product management, whether it is a specific customer issue or whether it is an enhancement. Leveraging AI is a great tool to help provide those feedback loops, as well as address some of the internal processes and standard operating procedures that we see internally. So the time that it takes manually to do that has never been that big of an issue until we had to do more with less in a post-COVID world. So a lot of companies and businesses are seeking AI for the purposes of that. And in doing so, also having to make sure that they're compliant with GDPR, data privacy issues in other regions as well as North America. Supply chain as a service and outsourcing. So, you know, with again, going on the post-COVID pandemic, there is also a need to be able to leverage the latest technology without the spend of having to invest in it in-house. So we're seeing a lot of outsourcing of various components of supply chain as a service in order to be able to leverage companies who can come in and fill a certain gap with pieces of technology or actual intellectual property to be able to fill those specific gaps. The circular supply chain, creating that closed loop supply chain, which also kind of has an impact on ESG. So as we see the big discussion around ESG, and how many of you have ESG related policies or practices, corporate sustainability reports? So ESG is a big topic today. And as a result of that, companies are looking for ways to be more sustainable. So how do we continue to create those circular loops back into the supply chain? And then also ensuring that we are more resilient as a result. ESG, as I mentioned, is a big topic and a source of service that we provide at Veriforce. And there are 3 different components of it. So it's ensuring that from a sustainability perspective, from a social DEI perspective, from a data governance, data privacy perspective, that we're helping our companies to be covered and understanding where they stand from a risk perspective. Because now ESG policies are actually a component of RFPs that we're seeing coming out today. And then, as I mentioned earlier, impacts from the labor shortage. So another big topic that we've seen. And what happens is new workers coming into the workforce are not getting the training that they need in order to effectively do their job. And workers that have been on the job for 3 to 4 years, we see that those are the workers that have the greatest risk because they start to look at their task as more routine. And depending on the type of work they're doing, whether it's shipping, whether it's working out in the oil field, whether it's working in the public utility sector, those jobs can be highly dangerous or highly hazardous. And we want to make sure that they're appropriately trained. So that's another big impact. What I'd like to do is I want to get your thoughts. What are you seeing in terms of your specific companies, how these trends are impacting you? So what I'd love to do is get some thoughts out from the audience. Any thoughts in terms of automation and artificial intelligence? Any one of you using that today or looking to use it or incorporate it into various aspects yet? What about supply chain as a service? Anyone at the moment looking at outsource? Okay. Risk management and resiliency. Really focusing on understanding risk and using data to understand risk. So this is actually leveraging predictive analytics, helping to have leading indicators to understand the potential of risk out there. Anyone? Okay. And then ESG. How many of you are at various stages in your journey with ESG? I just 2 weeks ago facilitated a panel that had a number of different, wide variety of different leaders from different industries talking about ESG. And what we're finding there is, in particular, just before we even get into policies, it's just understanding the data. What is our risk? And so having that information, being able to create your own score internally of where you stand is really important. How many of you are dealing with the last one, labor shortages, and having to fill those gaps? A lot more folks. Okay, so now, what I want to first talk about is the roles and processes and functions that create the supply chain. So when we look at the supply chain, and I kind of boiled it down to like the company level, the worker level, the work site level, you know, there are different things that we have to look at both before and during we're providing that work, and then of course after. And I'm going to talk about that cycle and flow in just a moment. But when we think about and how we can actually leverage some of our technology, like for example AI, our standard operating procedures, our programs, our business processes, we're finding that now more than ever, having those and following those is very critical, and making sure that as part of our onboarding process for workers that are coming into the workforce, that they are also appropriately trained in that. So leveraging that and including that as part of onboarding before going out to the workforce or the work site is very, very important. That leads to best practices and really also understanding country and region-specific requirements. We find that the requirements as it pertains to the supply chain are so very different from one nation, one region to the next. Where we see in North America a lot of mandates that we see in addition to things like, or companies like, or organizations like OSHA, but there are also company mandates themselves that have very specific requirements for workers and contractors and subcontractors. Whereas when we look at Europe, the UK and Europe mandates are actually done by the Ministry of Labor. So the Ministry of Labor sets very specific mandates that companies have to follow and their workers have to follow. So they're actually looking for companies to help them execute those mandates. Process configuration. So all about developing the right processes that are internally so that we can create a more seamless experience for our customers, and that's ultimately what we're here to do. And ensuring that all the way that we've got the right KPIs and scorecards that we're looking at to help us understand and make better data-informed decisions. All right, so this is, I'm kind of wearing my hat as a former enterprise architect, and one of the things I used to do was, first, before we get into strategy, look at the traceability between specific functional areas and roles and the objectives of those roles. So when we look at certain roles in the supply chain, whether it is procurement and purchasing or contractor companies, logistics, workers, each of those roles have very, very specific objectives. And it's important to understand those objectives because it's those objectives ultimately that we're creating metrics around for the purpose of reporting. And understanding, again, where we stand and what are the things that we really need to be laser focused on to ensure that we're doing everything possible to prevent any risk from happening or to mitigate any risk. So these are some of the objectives that we see. For example, how we improve, how operations works to improve quality, workers enhancing customer satisfaction internally and externally, improving health, sustainability, and environment. We're seeing that, of course, from our HSC. And do we have any HSC folks here in the room? And procurement, I know we have at least one procurement person in the room. What about anyone from operations that handle or work with operations? Okay, operations. So each of you have very specific goals, and if you are not able to have a solution or if your goals and those metrics are not accounted for, then that's one missing link in the overall supply chain of data that we're not necessarily tracking, which could lead to incremental impacts down the road. So understanding how those align and then having that traceability throughout the various functions. So for example, how are we ensuring that before we even go on site or before a work is performed to ship something to somewhere or transport something to somewhere, the people that are responsible for doing that, that we've done the appropriate due diligence to pre-qualify them for that work. So what does that entail? It entails making sure that we've got the right vendors and suppliers and contractors and that we're informing them of the necessary requirements, that we're appropriately onboarding them to the work that they'll be doing, and that along the way, there are measures and mechanisms to evaluate that. That may include learning and development if there is a specific task that we see that they need additional learning and development for, that we're training them, so having various training programs and training evaluations that we're doing. It also includes ensuring that they're completing a safety questionnaire. So one of the things that we do internally is we administer a standard global safety questionnaire to the supplier, the contractor, based on the requirements either of the company or the requirements of the country or region. So other specific requirements that we look at are, things like, MSA, making sure that, there is that master services agreement, insurance and acknowledgement, all of those things. If we're paying someone that really hasn't performed, that is not qualified to do the work, that creates a liability on the company. So one of the things that we do is we want to make sure that the contractor and workers, vendors and suppliers, have the necessary information on their end, and that the company that we're also representing has the necessary information to ensure that, one, I am getting pre-qualified and trained so that I am safety certified, and then two, as a company, I'm paying the people who are actually qualified. Because we've seen a lot of incidents, we actually work with OSHA in many respects, where OSHA has had to come down and oversee an incident that has occurred as a result of the supply chain. We see this a lot out there. We've seen explosions that occur. We've seen, especially in the oil and gas industry. And so our goal is to make sure that we're doing every single thing to mitigate that risk. thoughts from the group. When you think about pre-qualification, what are some thoughts that come to mind to you as it pertains to your business? Getting ready for the work. The experience, exactly. So one of the things that we want to do, especially with new workers coming into the workforce, is ensuring that they do have the foundational experience necessary to complete that job. And it's really interesting, even if it is loading and unloading cargo from onto a ship or vessel. You would think that, okay, well, you just train someone to load and unload, but what does that cargo contain in it? And how long has that cargo been sitting out there waiting to be shipped? What are the requirements of the contents contained in managing or handling that cargo? All of those things have to be imparted knowledge-wise, training-wise for the employee. They need to know because they could do something that could actually cause an explosion or a serious injury or fatality. So let's move on to one of the things that we work on is onboarding. So that experience, ensuring that workers are pre-qualified to do the work. So before they go on site, following a key fundamental set of regulations around training, making sure they have the right licenses and certifications. One of the things that we do is a global worker passport solution where a worker that comes in, and some of you may be working with contractors who are also connected to a number of other companies, and we see that all the time. So the requirement that one company may have may be very similar to another, and it's important to know that you've got, in working with a contractor that has those licenses and certifications, that helps in the pre-qualification process. So permits to work, the ability to show up and have your license and training credentials in one location that can be scanned through a QR code that then lets you on site to work. And then before you leave, to ensure that the necessary requirements to break down your work before you go have been followed. That's been evaluated and monitored before you then leave. If you're a manager or a supervisor, or if you're working with supervisors or foremen or forepersons, then making sure that they have the right span of control. Are they working with one person or 3 people or 5 people? If they're working with more than a certain number of people, does that put them at risk of being able to monitor that the work is being done properly? And we see a lot of that in energy and non-energy related, renewable and non-renewable energy related companies. Any input, thoughts on this? Raise your hands if you're seeing that what I'm talking about so far resonating with the part of work that you do. So far, so good? All right, great. Okay, control of work. So this is about how I've been pre-qualified, I've gone through the necessary requirements, and now I'm showing up for work. So a lot of different things can happen on the work site. And when I say work site can be a number of different things. Work site can be a property at an apartment community if I'm an HVAC contractor. It can be at the shipping, if I happen to work for Dubai World and I'm working at one of their ports. It can be if I work for ExxonMobil or BP and I happen to be out at a pipeline facility connecting pipe or working with a specific task. A number of different things where I need to make sure that, 1, I've got the right work permit, that I'm qualified to show up, and 2, if an incident happens, that we're following the guidelines, because the incident itself is one thing that will trigger an immediate investigation. And so when incidents occur, it's important to follow certain practices. OSHA has very, very specific requirements around incidents and the type of incidents and when you need to report the incident and how long you have after the incident has occurred. So, we're even working with small mom and pop shops that bring in people that are working with potentially hazardous chemicals, whether it's to clean a facility or to use it in a particular area. I mean, this impacts every type of business that we do. So having the ability to have standard operating procedures, that's why this is important, and I talked about it earlier today. Evaluating. So now comes the time, the work has happened, so what are we doing after the work? Was the work performed? Did the company or the contractor or the worker do exactly what they were supposed to do? And if so, do we have that information reported as such so that we can monitor that, evaluate that, and that helps to provide data-informed decisions as to whether or not we're going to use that contractor, that worker again. So the monitoring, the evaluation of the ongoing work is very critical, especially if we're working in an area of the supply chain where things are happening concurrently. So everything is not just very linear, very, very concurrent. So you need to have that quick information to know, was the work performed appropriately, because that has an impact on something else that's also in the process of going on. So when we look at all of that, our goal is to make sure that we've got repeatable, scalable processes. And that's one of the things I was talking about earlier, how we can leverage technology to make that happen. The importance of having the necessary workflows that occur throughout or within certain segments of the supply chain. Workflows that involve badging and approving someone to come on your site. Ensuring that we've got visibility into the data that's involved on a site, on a particular work site. So all of those components, when we look at the worker level, the company level, the work site level, the roles and responsibilities in the supply chain that we see, and their specific critical business needs, all of that has very specific data points that we need to make sure that we're tracking. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that we've got a good repository, data repository to manage that. I mean, some of that may also include the integration and automation of data exchange back and forth between systems so that you've got more of a robust data source that helps you make better data-informed decisions. Okay, so now that gets us to journey mapping. So it's important to understand the foundational things that I just mentioned because that ultimately takes a look at or helps us go into the actual journey itself. And so at Veriforce, we created a journey map very much like this, actually this one, to make sure that we're starting from the very beginning. So whether you're in sales or whether you're in operations or whether you're in the actual day-to-day logistics of the supply chain itself, one of the first things we want to make sure that we're doing is following a discovery phase. Understanding the intakes and the requirements so that we can help evaluate the right business processes and procedures that are ultimately going to be carried out. And inevitably, in the sales process, we're hoping to bring in new customers, and so that leads to a buy. And when that does, the one thing that we always see, regardless of industry, is a lot of work goes into the sale, client buys whatever the service that we're selling, and then there is a disconnect between the delivery and the actual sale. So having that continuity of business from all the information that was taken in to ensure that we're delivering for that customer. This goes to, I was speaking with two gentlemen from Hilton that are with Hilton. So I happen to be a consumer of Hilton. And so when I am contacting Hilton, when I'm calling them, chatting with them online, they're in a sense the salespeople that are trying to sell me the reservation. And a lot of times I can do it myself through self-service. But you know, the information that they're sharing with me and their sales pitch to get me to stay with Hilton has a lot of impact on what the experience is going to be when I set foot on a Hilton property, is what the person told me what I actually am going to experience. We see that's just one small example, but it's so important to have that alignment internally with your business to ensure that we're creating that seamless experience. And our customers are our workers and our contractors and our suppliers and our vendors and our colleagues as well, just like our customers are. When we get started, this is about implementing and onboarding. So regardless of the service that you're delivering, it's about understanding what the requirements were and delivering to those requirements and making sure that there is a communication process in place and knowing and depending on what you're doing and what aspects of the supply chain that you happen to work with, there's an element of change management in it as well. Whether it is changing one vendor to the next, it's learning new people, learning a new delivery method for how that other vendor provides that service. And we have to take that in as part of the process so that we are truly realizing value. And here is where a lot of times I see companies get hung up on, well, yes, absolutely, they're realizing value. Well, no, we're realizing our value. We're realizing the value that we're providing, but is the customer realizing the value? And what are the steps that we are taking to help ensure that the customer has realized the value in whatever that we're delivering? Can someone share, anyone, I'd love to get your thoughts on what are some of the products or services that you deliver out there? So we know that we've got a great hotel experience with Hilton, even though we're in Marriott. Apologies for that. What are other products or services that your companies deliver or provide? Software as a service. There you go. You were number 2 on my trend. What else? Software as a service is a huge, it impacts every single company that we work with. And so that can have a lot of expectations. And so setting those expectations is so critical in the sales process so that we deliver them in the implementation, onboarding and implementation aspect as well. It was great to hear earlier today that a lot of Enable's customer success managers are here, and that's the area that I work in. And customer success is really critical, and making sure that even the customer success managers have the right onboarding so that they are effectively delivering value and showing value on behalf of the companies that they represent. How many of you have customer success or customer service type of people at your companies? Just about everyone. They represent one of the most critical groups to effectively onboard to ensure that your journey is getting operationalized so that your customers, our customers, are renewing with us. And so that's the first stage, the first level of the customer journey. Next comes making sure that across the phases, we understand the stages and the touch points, the key deliverables, the KPIs, the roles and responsibilities that I was talking about earlier, the key systems, the touch points and the processes that are going to effectively deliver this across the entire journey. So this represents what you could consider a general journey map that any company could take and implement. And journey mapping can be very, very simple. It's about starting with very simple things and building from that, not trying to implement the entire thing. And I'll give you an example. I was working at a company who had, a previous year, or 5 years earlier, they had brought in a new sales leadership team, new salespeople, and they ramped up over those 5 years, which then led to huge sales. But the problem was it also led to big backlogs of delivery. So we couldn't keep up with the sales process. And so as a result, we were getting customers that were complaining, reaching out. It's been 6 weeks. We haven't seen the delivery of the product. What's going on? And so we were dealing with a lot of escalations as a result of that. So our first part of the journey was to actually focus on onboarding customers. So getting ready from purchase to getting started. And so that was all about helping the customer understand what it was they were to receive or the delivery that we were providing, whether it was a service, whether it was a deliver of goods, whether it was the implementation of a piece of software. So we created a customer onboarding plan that's pre-implementation, so it's pre-onboarding. So there are a lot of things that customers have to know and understand before they start a project. And so it's not necessarily, I signed the dotted line on the sales agreement and I want to start implementing today. Customers were saying, hey, I just want you to talk to me, want some visibility and transparency in what you're doing and how that's going to impact me. So as a result, we created this onboarding program to get the customer ready for what they were about to receive, the product and the delivery. And that included things like, well, understanding how to navigate our business and what are the tools and resources that are available to you. Understanding a communication plan, because a lot of what you're, depending on what you're implementing or the goods or services or what you're delivering, depending on your companies, that's gonna have an incremental impact on the communication of that company, your customer, has to their people internally. So how do we manage that communication plan? Change management is another big aspect of it. So it was about developing that appropriate onboarding plan. And so that helped us to effectively reach out to clients to get them onboarded and ready, while we also got our internal teams set up to handle the backlog. So we do that through a number of different ways, bringing in cohorts of customers together. And so again, this will vary depending on the type of company, but bringing in cohorts, having cohorts that work together. And as a result, we were able to use things like AI to manage an automated communication out to those customers so that immediately when they signed the contract, they were getting an onboarding guide, a welcome letter, video, everything they needed to get started, which is what they were looking for. So let me just make sure I didn't go. Yeah, there we go. So now, as we take it to the next level down, there may be different business processes or functions that we are delivering across the supply chain, whether it is health and safety related processes, environmental and sustainability, purchasing and finance related functions or processes, risk management, quality management, and corporate sustainability. So, each of those have different components to them, and understanding the processes and the owners, the people that own those business processes, is very important so that we can map out those processes with the outcomes we're trying to achieve. And so when we think about the overall customer journey, this is really what we're getting into. What are the key deliverables that we are providing? Who is going to be responsible and the touch points involved? And then specifically, what exactly are we measuring and how are we measuring it? Environment, social, and governance. So this is another big topic, as I mentioned earlier today, really talking about greenhouse gas emissions on the environment side, waste management. Those are two critical components that we work with our clients and that companies overall have as part of their corporate sustainability reporting. Social, diversity, inclusivity, equity, human rights. How many of you work with sites or companies or have companies in Europe? How about Germany? Germany? France? Okay, so just this year, both Germany, followed by France, and we're seeing the rest of the EU follow through, have released some very, very strict human rights policies. And so this is having an impact on the supply chain because you have to prove that you're adhering to those policies if you're going to do business with those countries. And so as a result, one of the things that's important to do is making sure that you can unequivocally be able to show that, and that's part of capturing that data. Governance, so GDPR, how many of you are familiar with GDPR? We all are. So this is becoming, again, increasingly a main stage player in our world in order to do business with different countries. And each country has their own GDPR practices. Again, we see that there's a lot in the EU and in Canada where they have actually created some very, very strict guidelines that are very different than the US. And so we have to be able to manage that, especially if we're providing any kind of technology services. How many of you, as you think about your ESG practices, are focused on the E? The S? The G? All the above? Okay, so we saw that as well in this panel that I had facilitated, that different companies are at different stages, but a lot of focus on the environmental aspects of it. Okay, so as I start to wrap up, I wanted to also talk a little bit about things like having repeatable onboarding practices, creating a methodology around how you deploy your services. For us, it's about the discover, collaborate, connect, comply, and optimize. Those are the phases that we take our customers through to effectively onboard them. And it's a repeatable practice with very specific requirements that we put in place, some of which are mandated by the companies that we're working with. So repeatable practices for how we're onboarding our clients is very critical. And then with those onboarding practices, making sure that we're adhering to specific guidelines. And some of those are procurement guidelines. Some of those are HSC-related guidelines for health, sustainability, and environment practitioners that are out there. Some of those are in-country guidelines. So this is where we come out with what we call our standard safety questionnaire to ensure that those guidelines are being managed or mitigated if we see potential risk. And then finally, data and analytics. So making sure that lagging indicators and leading indicators have their place in our world. Lagging indicators ensuring that when we see something, that we're doing something about it. So having a scorecard that we're able to comprise to look at things like, in our cases, incidences. Are there past incidences that have occurred? What's their insurance modification rate? What is their current rate of total recordable incidences? Those are things that are actually captured out there, and you may not know it, but those incidences are recordable and they're reportable as well. And it's important to have that understanding. So that there is even a credit score. What's the credit rating of the people that you're working with, the companies that you're working with? Leading indicators are also very important because they help tell the story. Is there a predictive risk out there? And leading indicators can be a number of different things, from safety observation reports, audits, pre-qualification, corrective actions that are done out there for specific workers and work sites as well. And so as we use predictive analytics, this helps us to ensure that we are really investing in the right strategies to drive safety and a safer and sustainable work environment. So how are we overall managing the way that we are, and what are the types of safety programs that we need to be managing for companies that we're working with? Contractors and subcontractors. What's the profile of the subcontractor or the contractor that are working on our sites? And we also have found that a lot of the companies that we're working with don't realize that subcontractors are being utilized to carry out certain aspects of the work. They have to go through qualification as well, and sometimes they don't. And so it's important to know that. This helps us to then put it all together. And in putting it all together, it's taking, as I mentioned earlier, the people that are involved in the roles, the touch points of who are involved in and are impacted through that journey. And so as you take that next step, what I recommend is to start with one element of your customer journey that represents the biggest impact to you, the biggest gap and need to address, and then focus on delivering one outcome from that to then build off of your journey. So that you've got the right people that are involved and the people that are going to be impacted, and ultimately the business processes. Thoughts and input from the group. Questions? So in a lot of cases, government is setting very specific guidelines, and the company has to follow guidelines that they have identified in their corporate sustainability report. Corporate sustainability reporting has come out because of mandates around ESG. And so what we're doing first is just tracking the data. If you said that this is where you're lowering greenhouse gas emissions by this percent, and we've documented that in our standard safety questionnaire score for ESG, then our next step is, okay, we'll prove it. We need to be able to see the specific report and the actions that you've taken. So our job also is around program analysis or program reviews to ensure that we're auditing what the contractor, what the entity, the vendor has said in their response to that particular question. Well, ultimately, if you're an extension of a company that you're working for, then that company is accountable for it. But if you're reporting that, and if you actually have a corporate sustainability report that you're posting that says this is what you're following, then you're claiming that, and you're also taking the accountability if audits come in and show that it's not. It's a good question, because we're seeing that our suppliers and vendors and companies are all claiming it, but ultimately the contractor, the vendor, the supplier is an extension of the company that they are serving, so the company takes accountability for it. All right. Well, thank you all so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of the conference.